Jodi Huisentruit.
Jodi Huisentruit.
Jodi Huisentruit.
Jodi Huisentruit.
Jodi Huisentruit.
Jodi Huisentruit.
At 3:54 a.m., television anchor Jodi Huisentruit answered a call from her producer. She had overslept but said she was getting ready and would leave for work immediately. Minutes later, a scream cut through the darkness outside her apartment. Police found her red Mazda still parked below, along with a bent car key, one red shoe, and personal belongings scattered across the pavement. Jodi was nowhere to be found. More than 30 years later, her body has never been recovered, and the person who may have been waiting for her before sunrise has never been identified.
The disappearance of news anchor Jodi Huisentruit.
The disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit.
Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance.
News anchor Jodi Huisentruit disappeared.
The disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit.
June 27, 1995. Mason City, Iowa, 27-year-old Jodi Huisentruit was supposed to appear on television that morning and deliver the local news. Instead, she became the story. Outside her apartment, investigators found signs of a sudden struggle. Neighbors reported hearing a scream. A suspicious white van had been seen nearby. And in the months before she vanished, Jodi had told friends that troubling phone calls and a possible stalker were making her feel unsafe. What followed was an investigation filled with disturbing clues, controversial suspects, lost opportunities, and questions that have survived for decades. Someone appears to have known exactly when Jodi would leave her apartment. But who was watching her? And how did they make a well-known television anchor disappear without leaving behind a single confirmed answer? Before Jodi Huisentruit became the center of one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries, she was a 27-year-old woman building the life she had imagined for years. She was ambitious, energetic, deeply connected to her family, and determined to move beyond small-market television. Her disappearance would eventually be reduced to a few unsettling images: a red shoe, a bent key, an abandoned car, but those objects tell only how her story changed. They do not explain who she was before that morning. Jodi Sue Huisentruit was born on June 5, 1968, and raised in Long Prairie, Minnesota, with her older sisters, Jill and Joanne. Friends remembered her as competitive, adventurous, and naturally social. She played golf, loved the outdoors, and helped her high school team win state championships. Even as a teenager, Jodi seemed unwilling to let life become predictable. Then, at 14, she lost her father, Maurice. The death reshaped the family and strengthened Jodi's relationship with her mother, Jane. As Jodi grew older and moved away for work, the distance never weakened that bond. They spoke regularly, traveled together, and remained closely involved in one another's lives. Ambition was important to Jodi. Family was permanent. After graduating from St. Cloud State University in 1990, Jodi briefly worked as a flight attendant. The job gave her movement and adventure, but it was not the future she wanted. Television was. She wanted to report stories, appear on camera, and eventually reach a major broadcasting market. Like many young journalists, she began by accepting smaller opportunities, learning to write under pressure, interview strangers, and remain composed when the camera light switched on. That path brought her to Kimped TV in Mason City, Iowa. There, Jodi became the anchor of the morning and noon news program, Daybreak. Viewers across northern Iowa came to recognize her face, her voice, and the upbeat personality she brought to television before sunrise. What viewers did not see was the routine behind the broadcast. Jodi often needed to arrive at the station before dawn. While most of Mason City slept, she would leave her apartment alone, walk across a dark parking lot, drive through nearly empty streets, and begin preparing the morning news. It was demanding, but familiar. And familiarity can create danger when someone else begins paying attention. 30 years after Jodi vanished, KTTC reported on friends and former colleagues gathering outside Kimped to remember her. Their memories focused not on the crime scene, but on Jodi's warmth, humor, ambition, and ability to make people around her feel important. That distinction matters. Over time, Jodi became known through evidence photographs: the red Mazda, the scattered belongings, the single shoe left on the pavement. Before any of those objects became evidence, they belonged to a woman who still had plans. Outside work, Jodi enjoyed golf, boating, water skiing, social events, and time with friends. She also kept journals, writing privately about relationships, loneliness, career goals, and her hope of finding lasting love. The confident anchor seen on television was still trying to understand where she belonged. One person who became close to her in Mason City was John Vances, a man 22 years older than Jody. They met through mutual friends and spent time together socially. Vances took her boating and arranged a surprise party for her 27th birthday. He later described their relationship as platonic and said he viewed Jody like a daughter. Some of her friends believed his feelings may have been stronger. At that time, it was only a disagreement about a friendship. After Jody disappeared, it would become part of the investigation. Yet the greater warning may have come from outside her social circle. Jody reportedly received troubling telephone calls from men who recognized her from television. She also told others that a man in a dark pickup truck had followed her while she was jogging. The encounter frightened her enough to contact police and take a self-defense class. No suspect was identified. No clear connection was established. Life continued. But was Jody reacting to unrelated moments or sensing that someone had begun studying her? On June 26, 1995, Jody attended a Chamber of Commerce golf tournament. Witnesses remembered her as cheerful and engaged. She made plans for later in the week and showed no sign that she intended to leave Mason City or disappear voluntarily. That evening, she visited John Vances to watch a birthday video he had recorded for her. Then Jody returned home and prepared for another early broadcast. To everyone around her, it was the end of an ordinary Monday. To someone familiar with her routine, it may have been the final night of waiting. At 3:54 a.m., on June 27, 1995, producer Amy Kunz made the call that would define the case. Jodi Huisentruit had not arrived at Kimt TV. She was normally at the station before dawn, preparing to anchor Daybreak. When Jody answered, she sounded as though the telephone had awakened her. She apologized for oversleeping, asked about the morning's news, and said she would get ready and leave immediately. It was the last confirmed conversation anyone had with her. Inside apartment 3 at the Key Apartments, Jody appears to have moved quickly. She dressed for work, gathered her belongings, and prepared to walk downstairs to her red Mazda Miata. The journey should have taken less than a minute. Apartment door, stairway, parking lot. Car, somewhere along those few steps, her morning ended. By 5:30 a.m., Jody still had not reached the newsroom. Amy called again, but this time the answering machine picked up. The 6 o'clock broadcast was approaching, leaving no time to continue waiting. Amy took Jody's place behind the anchor desk. Viewers saw the news begin as usual. They could not see the empty parking space in the newsroom, the unanswered telephone, or the growing fear that Jody's delay was no longer ordinary. If she had answered the first call and promised to leave, what prevented her from reaching a station only minutes away? For nearly 3 hours, there was no answer. At 7:13 a.m., Kimt contacted Mason City Police and requested that officers check on her. When police arrived at the apartment complex, Jody's Mazda was still parked outside. Then, they noticed what surrounded it. One of her red high-heeled shoes lay on the pavement. A hairdryer and other personal belongings had been scattered near the vehicle. Investigators recovered a bent car key, and marks on the ground appeared consistent with a struggle or with something being dragged. The scene did not suggest that Jody had calmly changed her plans. It suggested that she had reached her car and that someone had stopped her there. CBS News later presented crime scene photographs and documented the objects recovered near Jody's Mazda, including her shoes, hairdryer, keys, and other possessions. The report also described an unidentified palm print connected to the vehicle, a physical trace that investigators hoped might eventually identify the person involved. The print did not solve the case. The parking lot had preserved signs of violence, but not enough to reveal who had caused it. Officers entered Jody's apartment and searched for anything that might explain her disappearance. Investigators examined her personal life, her work, and correspondence at the television station. Search teams moved through nearby areas, while divers and firefighters checked the Winnebago River. Nothing led them to Jody. Then, witnesses began describing what they had heard and seen before sunrise. A neighbor reported hearing a woman scream around the period when Jody would have been leaving for work. Another account placed a suspicious white van near the apartment complex. Neither detail produced a confirmed suspect. No one had called police when the scream was heard. In the darkness, it may have sounded brief, distant, or impossible to understand. Only later did it become a possible record of Jody's final moments in the parking lot. By then, the person who took her had gained hours. How different might the investigation have been if someone had looked outside immediately or written down the van's license plate? Police searched the apartment grounds and surrounding areas. Jody's relatives traveled from Minnesota. Friends distributed missing person posters, and her colleagues reported on the disappearance of the woman who should have been delivering the news beside them. On July 1st, police publicly classified the case as an abduction. That conclusion sharpened the most disturbing detail in the timeline. Jody had overslept. If an attacker had planned around her normal departure time, she should have missed the encounter. Yet when she finally emerged later than expected, someone was apparently still near her car. Perhaps the person knew she remained inside. Perhaps they were willing to wait. Or perhaps the attack was not timed to the minute at all. The evidence could establish only part of the story. Jody was alive when she spoke to Amy. She prepared to leave. A violent confrontation occurred beside the Mazda. Before the city fully awakened, she and whoever confronted her were gone. Her car remained. Her belongings remained. And the morning broadcast continued without the woman who was supposed to lead it. In the years after Jodi Huisentruit vanished, investigators repeatedly returned to one man, not because they had proved he was involved, but because his place in her life remained difficult to ignore. His name was John Van Sish. Van Sish was 22 years older than Jody and had once lived in the same Mason City apartment complex. They became friends through a shared social circle, spent time boating, attended gatherings together, and appeared comfortable together. To Van Sish, the friendship was innocent. He later said he viewed Jody like a daughter. Some of Jody's friends remembered it differently. They believed his feelings may have extended beyond friendship. His decision to name a boat after her and the amount of time they spent together would later attract public attention. None of that established guilt. Friendship can look suspicious after a tragedy simply because investigators begin examining every ordinary moment through the knowledge of what came next. But one detail placed Van Sish unusually close to the final hours of Jody's known life. On the evening of June 26, 1995, Jody reportedly visited his home to watch a videotape from the surprise birthday party he had helped arrange for her that month. Van Sish said she was happy and laughing when she left. Hours later, Jody disappeared. That timing guaranteed scrutiny. Investigators interviewed him, examined his account, and reportedly obtained his fingerprints, palm prints, and DNA for comparison. No publicly disclosed forensic evidence matched him to the struggle beside Jody's Mazda. He was never charged. He was never publicly established as the person who abducted her. Even so, the case continued circling back to him. Why would investigators keep revisiting a man they could not connect to the crime scene? The answer remained hidden for years. In April 2025, KCE reported that a judge had unsealed part of a 2017 search warrant connected to the investigation. The released material confirmed that police had placed GPS tracking devices on 2 vehicles owned by Van Sish. The vehicles did not exist when Jody vanished in 1995. Investigators were not trying to identify the original getaway vehicle. They were watching where Van Sish traveled more than 2 decades later. That changed how the warrant had to be understood. Police may have hoped that renewed contact with investigators would cause a person involved in the crime to visit a meaningful location, perhaps a place connected to hidden evidence or Jody's remains. The released GPS data documented travel from Iowa toward Arizona, with stops across several states. Yet authorities later indicated that the surveillance produced no useful breakthrough. No burial site emerged, no hidden evidence was recovered, no charge followed. The affidavit explaining precisely why the warrant was requested remained sealed, meaning the strongest part of the reasoning was still unavailable to the public. That secrecy created 2 competing interpretations. Perhaps investigators possessed information serious enough to justify monitoring Van Sish, but insufficient to prosecute him. Or perhaps they were testing a long-standing theory because every stronger lead had already failed. Without the sealed affidavit, neither conclusion can be presented as fact. Van Sish consistently denied involvement. When journalists approached him in later years, he sometimes declined to discuss the case, but silence is not proof. A person living under decades of suspicion may refuse interviews for different reasons. The distinction matters because unsolved cases can turn proximity into presumed guilt. Van Sish knew Jody. He reportedly saw her the night before she disappeared. Some friends questioned the nature of their relationship. Police later tracked vehicles connected to him. Those facts explain why investigators examined him. They do not prove that he stood in the parking lot before dawn. In December 2024, Van Sish died without ever being charged in Jody's disappearance. His death removed the possibility of another interview and ensured that any knowledge he possessed, whether relevant or completely innocent, could no longer be tested through questioning. Then the partial warrant was unsealed. Instead of resolving suspicion, it revealed how intensely police had continued examining him while withholding the reason from public view. Was John Van Cees the central figure investigators could never connect to the crime? Or did years of attention remain fixed on the most visible man in Jody's life while an unknown predator escaped scrutiny? The evidence released so far cannot answer either question. What it does show is that 22 years after Jody vanished, investigators were still searching for a reaction, a destination, or a mistake that might expose the truth. They found none. And while public attention stayed focused on the friend who had seen Jody hours earlier, a very different lead was developing, one involving a convicted sexual predator, an alleged confession, and a search for human remains more than 2 hours from Mason City. The most dramatic lead in Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance did not begin with a witness from her apartment complex. It began inside a jail. Years after Jody vanished, investigators still had no confirmed attacker. Then the name Tony DeJuan Jackson entered the case. Jackson was not one of Jody's friends or co-workers. There was no confirmed evidence that the two had ever met. Jackson was living in Mason City around the time Jody disappeared. 2 years later, authorities charged him in connection with violent sexual assaults in the Minneapolis area. He was eventually convicted of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, kidnapping, and burglary. His crimes involved surprise, control, and attacks on women in vulnerable settings. That history made him impossible to ignore. Could a man capable of entering women's homes and overpowering them have approached Jody outside hers? The evidence was still missing. Then a jail informant named Dennis Goff made an explosive claim. Goff said he had spent time with Jackson while Jackson was awaiting trial. According to him, Jackson eventually spoke about killing an anchor woman. Goff also claimed Jackson recited a rap containing words that might point toward the location of the woman's body. The alleged lyrics appeared to suggest Tiffin, Iowa, more than 2 hours from Mason City. For investigators, the lead suddenly offered a name, an alleged confession, and a searchable location. But jailhouse claims come with an immediate problem. Informants can tell the truth. They can also misunderstand conversations, exaggerate what they heard, seek attention, or hope their cooperation will benefit them. If Goff's account was real, the Tiffin clue might lead investigators directly to Jody. If it was false, the case was about to lose more time chasing another illusion. ABC News later reported the allegation in detail. Goff claimed Jackson had spoken about murdering an anchorwoman and recited lyrics that might indicate where Jody's body was hidden. Jackson firmly denied making the confession and denied any role in her disappearance. In 1998, investigators followed the clue to a silo near Tiffin. Cadaver dogs were brought to the property. Searchers examined the area for any sign of human remains. For a moment, detectives were standing on physical ground connected to a specific allegation. If the dogs alerted, years of uncertainty could collapse into a single discovery. They found nothing. No human remains. No clothing. No personal property belonging to Jody. The search ended without confirming even one part of the alleged confession. Attention then shifted to another detail. Jackson had purchased a car one day before Jody vanished. Could that vehicle have been used to remove her from Mason City? Could its mileage reveal a trip toward Tiffin? Investigators examined the possibility, but they could not reconstruct the vehicle's movements well enough to connect it to the crime. A purchase date created suspicion, not proof. By then, the theory seemed to contain every piece needed for a convincing story. A violent offender living in Mason City, an alleged confession, a vehicle purchased the previous day, a possible burial site. Yet each element weakened when investigators tried to verify it. No witness placed Jackson outside Jody's apartment. No evidence showed that he knew her schedule. The Tiffin search produced nothing. His DNA did not match evidence held by Mason City police. In 1999, authorities officially cleared Jackson in connection with Jody's disappearance. That decision did not erase his name from public discussion. His convictions made him frightening. The alleged confession made him memorable. Together, they created a theory powerful enough to survive even after police said the evidence did not support it. Jackson continued denying involvement for decades. In a prison interview, he argued that people had taken the crimes he committed and used them to assume he must also be responsible for Jody's disappearance. He was guilty of serious and violent offenses. that did not make him guilty of this one. The Jackson lead reveals one of the greatest dangers in an unsolved investigation. A theory can feel complete long before it becomes true. It offered a predator before it produced forensic evidence, a burial site before a body, and an alleged confession that led investigators to empty ground. For a brief period, a silo near Tiffin appeared capable of ending the mystery. Instead, it became another place where Jody was not found. The lead collapsed, but it left behind a troubling possibility. If Jackson was not the person who took Jody, investigators were still searching for someone who may have watched her routine, waited in darkness, and attacked when she was alone. And before Jody disappeared, she had already begun telling people that she felt unsafe. Long before Jodi Huisentruit vanished beside her car, she had already begun noticing signs that something was wrong. In October 1994, while exercising alone on a trail in Mason City, Jody became concerned about a dark pickup truck that appeared to remain near her instead of simply passing by. The encounter frightened her enough to contact police. The driver was never identified. No arrest followed. At the time, it looked like an isolated incident. Months later, it would feel like the first warning. Jody also told friends that she had been receiving disturbing telephone calls from men who recognized her from television. The calls were troubling enough that she discussed changing her number and taking further precautions. She enrolled in a self-defense class. She became more alert, but she kept working. That decision was understandable. Jody was a local news anchor, and visibility was part of her profession. Every morning, viewers saw her face, heard her voice, and learned small details about her life. Most watched because they trusted her. One person may have watched for a different reason. A television personality in a small city is both public and reachable. Jody's work schedule was unusually predictable. She left home before sunrise, crossed the same apartment parking lot, entered the same red Mazda, and drove through quiet streets toward Kimt. Anyone paying attention would not need access to her private calendar. They would only need patience. The most unsettling part of June 27, 1995, is that Jody did not leave at her normal time. She overslept. Her producer's call woke her shortly before 4 a.m., and Jody said she would get ready and leave immediately. If the person who attacked her had planned around her regular routine, the delay should have ruined the opportunity. Yet when Jody finally stepped outside, someone appears to have still been there. Why? Perhaps the attacker knew she had not left. Perhaps they were watching her apartment. Perhaps they had waited through the delay because they had chosen Jody, not simply a convenient moment. None of those possibilities has been proven, but the delay makes a purely accidental encounter harder to understand. The confrontation itself appears to have happened quickly. A scream was heard. Her belongings fell beside the Mazda. Her key was bent. Marks on the pavement suggested force had been used. A suspicious white van was reportedly seen near the complex. The dark pickup Jody had reported months earlier and the white van seen around the morning of her disappearance were different vehicles. No verified evidence has ever connected them. Still, both accounts share one disturbing feature. An unidentified vehicle appeared near Jody while she was alone. The telephone calls remain equally unresolved. In 1995, there was no smartphone location history, no neighborhood network of doorbell cameras, and no digital archive capable of reconstructing every movement around the apartment complex. A caller could remain anonymous, a watcher could remain unseen, and an attacker could leave before the city understood that a crime had occurred. In November 2025, Kurg reported that investigators returned to Winston, Minnesota, where another property had previously been searched. Police used a specially trained dog and examined an area where a house had recently been demolished. Nothing significant was found. That search, 3 decades after Jody vanished, shows that the investigation is not merely a historical file. Authorities are still following locations, testing leads, and searching for the physical evidence that has always been missing. But every unsuccessful search also deepens the central mystery. If Jody was taken by someone who had studied her routine, where was she taken next? If the attack was planned, how long had that person been watching? And if the warnings were connected, why did none of them contain the one detail investigators needed most to name? The black pickup, the anonymous calls, the white van, and the delayed departure create a pattern that feels meaningful. Yet a pattern is not proof. No publicly confirmed evidence has established that the same person was behind all of those events. No motive has been proven. No suspect has been charged. What remains is a sequence of warnings that only became clear after Jody was gone. She sensed danger. She reported it. She prepared for it. And still, someone reached her in the narrow distance between her apartment and her car. 30 years later, investigators are still searching for the person who may have turned her routine into a trap and for the place where that person took her before sunrise. More than 30 years have passed since Jodi Huisentruit answered her producer's call and said she was on her way to work. She never arrived. Her red Mazda remained in the parking lot. Her belongings were scattered beside it. The evidence suggested a violent struggle only steps from her home. But Jody was never found. No one has been charged. And the person responsible has never been publicly identified. For the world, this became one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. For Jody's family, it became a lifetime of searches, false hope, unanswered questions, and anniversaries marked by silence. The investigation remains open. One overlooked memory, one hidden piece of evidence, or one person finally choosing to speak could still change everything. This case required extensive research and considerable time to examine every credible angle. If you are interested in reading the complete investigation, I will include all resource links in the description. Jody told the newsroom she was coming. The broadcast began without her. And for those who loved her, that morning never truly ended. What do you believe happened to Jodi Huisentruit? Share your theory in the comments. Subscribe for more deeply researched true crime documentaries. And help keep the search for answers alive.